My son looked me in the eye at his kitchen table and told me I was no longer welcome in his home. His wife stood behind him with her arms crossed and a small smile she didn't bother to hide. I was 61 years old, and I had spent 35 of those years making sure that boy never needed anything. That was the moment I understood. I had spent my whole life loving someone who was learning, very carefully, how not to love me back. This is the story of how I almost lost myself, and how I found something better on the other side. My name is Carol Simmons. I want you to know that name, because for a long time, a very long time, I forgot it mattered. I was 26 years old when my husband Dennis walked out. Our son, Michael, was 3. Dennis left on a Tuesday morning while Michael was eating cereal and I was getting ready for work, and by the time I came out of the bathroom, he was simply gone. No fight, no warning, just a note on the kitchen counter that said he needed to find himself, and a drawer full of empty hangers where his clothes used to be. I stood in that kitchen for a very long time. And then I washed Michael's cereal bowl, put it in the drying rack, and went to work. That's who I was. That's who I had always been. You deal with the thing in front of you. You don't sit down in the middle of the road just because someone knocked you over. You get up. You keep moving. You have a 3-year-old boy looking at you with those big brown eyes, and he needs you to be okay, so you are okay. I worked as a bookkeeper for a small accounting firm, not glamorous, not high-paying, but steady. I took on a second job on weekends, helping with inventory at a department store. I couponed. I packed lunches. I drove a car with 3 missing hubcaps for 6 years because new hubcaps were not in the budget and Michael needed new cleats for soccer and a school trip to Washington, D.C., and braces for the crooked bottom teeth that he got from Dennis's side and didn't thank me for straightening. I am not telling you this to make myself a saint. I made mistakes. I was sometimes too tired to be patient. I missed his 3rd grade play because I had a work deadline, and I still think about that. I was not a perfect mother. But I was present. Every single day I was present. Michael's father came back into the picture when Michael was about 8. Not to us. Dennis had moved to Colorado with the woman he'd found himself with, and they had 2 other children by then. But he started calling, remembered birthdays, flew Michael out for 2 weeks every summer. I never said a word against Dennis to that boy. Not one word. Even when Michael came home from those trips glowing with stories about Dennis's house and Dennis's boat and Dennis's big backyard, I smiled and I listened and I asked questions and I swallowed whatever I needed to swallow. Because Michael's relationship with his father was not about me, I understood that. Children need both parents, even imperfect ones. So I kept quiet and I kept giving, and I told myself that someday Michael would understand what it meant, what I had done, what I had chosen, what I had sacrificed. That was my second mistake, waiting for someone to notice. Let me tell you about Michael at his best, because I want you to understand why this hurt the way it did. He was funny, genuinely, naturally funny, the kind of kid who could make a whole table of people laugh without even trying. He had Dennis's looks and my stubbornness, and somehow the combination had produced a person who was charming and determined, and when he was young, deeply kind. He used to bring me wildflowers from the field behind our apartment complex. He was 11 years old, and he'd come home with a fistful of weeds and dandelions and present them to me like they were roses and say, "For the best mom in the world." I have a photograph from that day. He's got a gap-toothed smile and dirt on his knees, and he is so proud of those flowers. I kept that photograph on my fridge for 20 years. He was a good student when he applied himself, which was not always. He played soccer through high school. He was decent at it, not scholarship material, but he loved it. I drove him to practice 3 days a week for 9 years, rain or shine, after full days of work, and I sat in the bleachers in October cold with a thermos of coffee and cheered louder than any parent on that sideline. He got into college, a state school, not far from home. I had saved for it, not enough, but what I could. He took out loans for the rest, which he didn't love, but I explained that it was the best I could do and he nodded, and I thought he understood. He was 22 when he met Veronica. She was a year older than him, the daughter of a physician in upstate New York, raised in a house that had a name, not an address, a asterisk name asterisk. Willow Creek, they called it, like it was an estate. She was polished and pretty and precise in a way that reminded me, uncharitably, of a knife. Elegant but designed for cutting. The first time Michael brought her home, I made pot roast and homemade rolls because that was his favorite meal, and I wanted her to feel welcome. She ate 3 bites and mentioned twice that she was being careful about carbs. She looked around my house with the particular expression of someone who is working very hard not to look around. I was gracious. I was warm. I asked about her family, her studies, her interests. She answered in short, complete sentences, and never once asked me a question about myself. Michael didn't notice, or if he did, he didn't mention it. I told myself she was just nervous. I gave her the benefit of the doubt. You know by now what I'm going to say about that. It didn't happen all at once. I want to be clear about that, because when people hear stories like mine, they sometimes imagine a single dramatic moment where the child turns into a stranger. But that's not how it works. It's gradual, incremental. The way water erodes stone, you don't see it happening, and then one day you look and the shape of everything is different. The first thing I noticed was the phone calls. Michael and I used to talk every Sunday. Without fail, since he'd left for college Sunday evenings, sometimes 30 minutes, sometimes an hour. We talked about his week and my week and whatever was happening in the world, and sometimes nothing in particular. Those calls were the thing I looked forward to most all week. They made me feel like whatever distance was between us, we were still connected. After Veronica, the Sunday calls started missing. Once every other week, then once a month. Then they became text messages, *busy this week, everything fine, talk soon, that arrived like form letters, efficient and empty. I told myself he was building a life. I told myself this was natural, this was healthy, that grown children pull away, and that's how it's supposed to go. I read articles about it. I talked to my friend Deanne about it. Deanne's son lived 2 miles away and came for dinner every week, and I tried not to compare. The second thing I noticed was the visits. Michael and Veronica lived in Philadelphia after they married. I was not consulted about the wedding date, discovered later that it had been set during the 1 month I had told Michael I had vacation planned. But I came anyway and smiled in every photograph and said nothing. They lived 4 hours from me by car, which was drivable. I drove it several times a year in the early days. But slowly, visiting became complicated. There were scheduling conflicts. Veronica had events. Michael had work trips. The guest room was being painted and then being used as a home office and then just generally not available. I started staying in a hotel when I visited. I paid for my own hotel. I paid for my own meals. I drove 4 hours each way and paid for the privilege of spending 48 hours in a city where my son fit me into his schedule like an appointment. I kept going, because he was my son, because I thought showing up was what love looked like. The third thing I noticed, and this one cut the deepest, was the money. Not me asking them for money, the other direction. Michael came to me twice in the years after they married. Once when they wanted to put a down payment on a condo. They were short $15,000, and could I help? I had $22,000 in savings at that point, money I had been setting aside slowly for years, money I thought of as my cushion, my security, the thing that stood between me and real vulnerability in my older years. I gave him $12,000. The second time was when he wanted to start a business, a consulting firm, his and Veronica's, leveraging their networks. They needed startup capital. Could I help? I gave him another $8,000. He did not offer to pay either amount back. I did not ask. That was my mistake, and I own it, but I also want to say, I didn't give that money expecting repayment. I gave it expecting that when a mother gave everything she had, her child would at least know it, would at least see it. I don't think Michael ever told Veronica where the down payment money actually came from. I found that out later, along with everything else. I need to tell you about Veronica, because this story doesn't make sense without her. She was not a monster. I want to say that clearly, because I am 61 years old and I have been through enough to know that the world is rarely divided into monsters and angels. Veronica was a woman who had grown up in a certain world with certain expectations, and Michael did not meet those expectations when she married him, and so she set about quietly reshaping him into someone who did. She came from money, real money, the kind that has been sitting in the same family for 3 generations and has developed opinions. Her father had a way of looking at you that made you feel like he was calculating your net worth in real time. Her mother was the sort of woman who said asterisk charming when she meant beneath us. And I, a 60-year-old bookkeeper from Ohio who drove a Honda and clipped coupons, was not what they had envisioned for their daughter's life either. I think Veronica was embarrassed by me, not because she was malicious, but because she cared enormously about how things looked, about what her parents thought, what her friends thought, what the whole carefully constructed image of her life communicated to the world. And I was an inconsistency in that image, a reminder that her husband came from something ordinary. She never said this to me directly. She didn't have to. It was in the way she addressed me as Carol from day one, never Mom, not even after they married, not even after I asked gently if she'd consider it. It was in the way she talked over me at dinner, the way she redirected conversations away from my life and toward theirs, the way she would say, "Oh, that's sweet," when I described something I was proud of, in the exact tone of voice you use with a child who has drawn you a picture. She was chipping away at my son's image of me, not with lies exactly, with emphasis, with framing, with the patient, consistent work of a woman who understood that you don't turn someone against their mother by attacking, you do it by shaping what they see. She pointed out regularly that Michael and I were very different people, that my way of doing things was not the way they did things, that my opinions about money, about parenting, about how to live were old-fashioned or working class or simply asterisk not how we operate, Carol. And Michael, who had once brought me dandelions and called me the best mom in the world, started to see me through her eyes. That's the most painful part, not that she pushed, but that he let himself be pulled. The last 2 years before the breaking point were the hardest. I was 60 now. I had retired from the accounting firm, not entirely by choice. They downsized and my position was eliminated, and at 60, finding comparable work is not the simple thing people like to pretend it is. I had my savings, somewhat depleted. I had Social Security, not yet available. I had a modest pension. I was not destitute, but I was careful in a way that reminded me of those early years after Dennis left. Michael knew this. I had been honest with him about my financial situation, perhaps more honest than I should have been, in retrospect, because I think honesty about vulnerability invites people to either protect you or take advantage of you, and I had misjudged which one my son would choose. The phone calls had dwindled to almost nothing. When I called, I more often than not got voicemail. When I texted, I got short responses, hours or days later. I drove to Philadelphia for Thanksgiving that year. I had not been invited, exactly. I had asked if I could come, and after a long pause, Michael had said, "Of course," in the voice of a man saying asterisk fine asterisk. I drove 4 hours. I brought a pie I had made from scratch and a bottle of wine and a gift for their new dog, whose birthday Michael had mentioned in passing. Veronica's parents were there, her brother and his wife, a couple of their friends. I was seated at the far end of the table. The conversations happened around me about their trip to Portugal, about a gallery opening, about a restaurant in Manhattan I had never been to. Every time I tried to join in, the conversation moved on before I finished speaking. Not aggressively, just past me. After dinner, while I was helping clear plates, I always help. I was raised to always help. I overheard Veronica say to her mother, in the kitchen, her voice lowered but not lowered enough, "She just shows up. It's exhausting." I stood in the doorway with a stack of plates, and I did not move for a very long time. Then I set the plates on the counter, and I went and got my coat, and I told Michael I was heading to my hotel because I was tired from the drive. He looked relieved. He walked me to my car and hugged me briefly and said, "Drive safe." I sat in my hotel room that night, and I ate a granola bar from my purse, and I thought, when did I become someone who needs to be tolerated? The breaking point came 6 months later, and it came the way most things do, not as a single explosion, but as the final straw after years of accumulated weight. It was a Sunday morning. I was home, drinking coffee, reading a book I had checked out from the library. My phone buzzed, a text from Michael. "Mom, we need to talk. Can you call me?" My stomach dropped. Those words in that order are never good news. I called. He answered, and I could tell immediately that he was nervous. Michael gets clipped when he's nervous. Short sentences, no warmth, efficient. "Mom, I need to say something and I need you to let me get through it." "Okay," I said. "Veronica and I have been talking, and we feel like there needs to be some boundaries set around our relationship. We love you, but we feel like you have a tendency to overstep, and it's creating tension in our home." I held my coffee cup with both hands. "Overstep," I said very carefully. "Showing up without enough notice, commenting on how we run things, the way you talk to Veronica sometimes." "The way I talk to Veronica?" "She feels criticized by you. She feels like you don't respect how we choose to live." I thought about Thanksgiving, about the stack of plates I was carrying when I heard her call me exhausting. I thought about 4 hours of driving, about $20,000, about 35 years of dandelions and soccer practice and cereal bowls washed before dawn. "Michael," I said, "can I ask you a specific example of overstepping?" A pause. "You called her by the wrong name. You keep calling her Veronica when her friends call her Ronnie." I felt something inside me go very still. "Her name is Veronica," I said. "That's the name she introduced herself with. She goes by Ronnie with people she's close to." "I see, and I'm not close to her." Silence. "She finds you intimidating," he said finally. I almost laughed, not from humor, from the sheer distance between what was true and what was being presented as true. "I would like to come and talk about this in person," I said. Another pause. "Okay, next weekend." I went the following Saturday. I dressed carefully, not because I was performing, but because I wanted to be taken seriously, and I had learned that in certain rooms, the packaging matters. I wore a blazer I'd had for years, good shoes. I did my hair. I drove 4 hours. I sat at their kitchen table. Veronica sat beside Michael with her arms crossed. And my son told me I was no longer welcome in his home until I was willing to accept certain boundaries. No unannounced contact, no unsolicited opinions, no discussion of the past. "The past," I said. "She means our financial situation," Veronica said. "We don't want to keep relitigating what you've done for us." "What I've done for us?" "I'm not trying to relitigate anything," I said. "I've never asked for a single thing in return." "Your asterisk attitude is the ask," Veronica said. Her voice was completely level, practiced. "Every time you're here, we feel indebted. It's not a healthy dynamic." I looked at my son. He looked at the table. 61 years old, 4 hours of driving, and my son was looking at the table. "Michael," I said quietly, "look at me." He did, slowly. "Is this what you want?" I said. "Not what she wants, not what's easier. Is this truly what you want?" He held my gaze for 3 seconds, and then he looked away. That was my answer. I stood up. I picked up my purse. I said, "All right." Not with anger, not with tears. Just with the calm of a woman who has finally heard something she needs to hear in order to move forward. "I love you," I said to my son. "I will always love you, but I am not going to beg to be treated decently." I walked out of that kitchen, down the hall, out the front door. I got in my car. I drove about 2 miles before I pulled into a gas station parking lot and sat there and cried harder than I had cried since the morning Dennis left. Because this was worse. A husband leaving you is devastating. A child dismissing you is something else. It is the return of everything you gave, stamped asterisk insufficient and handed back. I sat there for 40 minutes. Then I wiped my face. I put the car in drive. And I started thinking. I want to tell you about the next 18 months, because this is the part of the story people rush past, and I think it's the most important part. When I got home that Saturday night, I did something I had not done in a very long time. I sat at my kitchen table with a notebook and I wrote down, honestly and without self-pity, exactly where I stood. Financially, emotionally, practically. Financially, savings at $31,000. Pension of $1,100 a month. Social Security eligible in 4 years. House paid off, that was the one thing I had managed to accomplish. The little house I'd bought 12 years ago and paid down stubbornly, month by month. It was mine, free and clear. Emotionally devastated, but not broken. There's a difference. Devastated is an event. Broken is a choice. I was not going to choose broken. I called Diane that Sunday. I told her everything, which I had not done before because I had been protecting Michael's image. I stopped protecting it. Diane listened for an hour without interrupting, and at the end she said, "Carol, what do you need?" Nobody had asked me that in a long time. "I need to figure out who I am when I'm not somebody's mother," I said. That was the beginning. I started with small things. I joined a book club, something I had thought about for years but had always put off for some reason related to being available if Michael needed something. I took a watercolor class at the community center, just because I had always been vaguely curious, and now I had the time. I started walking every morning 2 miles, not for weight loss, but for the ritual of it, the way it made me feel like the day was mine to begin. I updated my resume and reached out to former colleagues, not because I needed to, but because I wanted to stay sharp and engaged. I started doing freelance bookkeeping work, small businesses, word of mouth, flexible hours. It brought in money, but more than that, it reminded me that I was competent, that my skills were real and valuable and not dependent on anyone's approval. I made an appointment with an estate attorney, not because I had a plan yet, but because I wanted to understand my options. I wanted to know exactly what my house was worth, what my assets were, and what my choices were going forward. The attorney was a woman about my age named Patricia Greer who listened carefully and then said something that changed my thinking. "You are in a stronger position than you realize. The question is what you want to do with it." What did I want to do with it? I thought about that for weeks. And in the meantime, I stopped calling Michael, not out of anger, not as punishment, but because I had realized, sitting in that gas station parking lot, that I had been pursuing my son for years. Showing up when I wasn't wanted, calling into voicemail, adjusting, accommodating, making myself smaller, and each time I did, I confirmed for both of us that I was someone who could be treated that way. I stopped confirming it. The silence from their direction was immediate and complete. No calls, no texts, not a word for 3 months, which told me something important. He wasn't fighting for the relationship either. He was simply waiting to see what I would do. I was done being predictable. About 4 months into my silence, my neighbor Betty, a 70-year-old retired schoolteacher who knew everything that happened on our street, knocked on my door with a casserole and a look on her face that said she had information. I let her in. I put on coffee. She sat at my kitchen table and said, "Carol, I don't want to get involved, but I think you should know something." Veronica's consulting business, the one I had given $8,000 to help launch, had collapsed. Betty's son worked in Philadelphia in financial services and had heard through a professional connection that the firm had gone under, that there had been some kind of dispute with a business partner, and that Michael and Veronica were in significant debt. I sat with this for a long moment. "When?" I asked. "About 6 weeks ago, from what he heard." 6 weeks ago, Michael had not called me, had not reached out. The same son who had come to me twice for money when times were hard had not picked up the phone during the hardest time yet. Whether because he was too proud, or because Veronica wouldn't allow it, or simply because he had forgotten that I was a resource, I didn't know. And sitting at that table, I realized it didn't actually matter. What mattered was the clarity it gave me. He had not called because he expected I would come to him. That was the habit we had built, me arriving, me offering, me pressing money into his hands and never speaking of it again. He was waiting for me to hear somehow and show up. And for the first time in 35 years of being Michael's mother, I did not show up. I sent him a text, one text. "Heard things have been hard. I love you. I'm here if you want to talk." No more than that. He did not respond. 3 months later, I changed my will. I want to be honest with you about this, because I know some of you will have opinions about it. I didn't do it out of spite. I didn't do it as revenge. I did it because I sat down with Patricia Greer again and had an honest conversation about what I wanted my legacy to look like, and the answer that came out surprised even me. I had 2 people in my life who had shown me, consistently and without condition, what it meant to be loved and valued. My friend Diane, who had sat with me on the phone for hours and brought me soup when I was sick and told me the truth even when it was hard. And my niece, Claire, my brother's daughter, who called me every week and spent Christmas with me and treated me like I mattered. I restructured my will to leave the house equally between Diane and Claire, with a provision that it could be sold and the proceeds split. I set aside a smaller amount for Michael, not nothing, but not everything, and I wrote him a letter not to be delivered now, but to be included with the will that explained my thinking, not with anger, with love and with honesty. I told him that I had given him everything I had for 35 years, that I was proud of the person he was capable of being, that I had not stopped loving him and I never would, that the choices I had made about my estate were not punishment. They were simply the honest reflection of my life as I had actually lived it, and of the people who had actually been in it. I sealed the letter. I gave it to Patricia. I walked out of her office into an autumn afternoon, and I breathed and I thought, I am free. Not from loving him. You don't get free from that, but free from the performance of hopping. Free from rearranging myself to deserve something that should have been freely given. Free from waiting at a door that had been shut in my face and pretending it was open. I did not expect to hear from Michael. I had genuinely stopped expecting it. So when my phone rang 14 months after I walked out of his kitchen, and his name was on the screen, I sat with it in my hand for a long moment. I answered. Mom, his voice was different, quieter, something stripped from it that I couldn't quite name. Are you okay to talk? Yes, I said. A long pause. Veronica and I separated, he said. I said nothing. I waited. 3 months ago, I don't want to go into details right now, but she's gone. She moved back to her parents. I'm sorry, I said, and I meant it not sarcastically, not with satisfaction, genuinely, because my son was in pain and that still mattered to me even now. Mom, his voice broke, just slightly. I've been wanting to call you for a long time. Why didn't you? A very long pause. Because I didn't know what to say, because I knew I'd have to face what I did, what I let happen. I sat in my kitchen in the quiet of the evening and I thought about the dandelions. I thought about the soccer field at 6 a.m. I thought about the cereal bowl. I'm listening, I said. He talked for a long time. He told me things about the marriage, about who Veronica had turned out to be behind closed doors. About moments he was ashamed of. He told me that she had convinced him, slowly, that his family, meaning me, was holding him back. That my way of life was an embarrassment. That my presence reminded him of things she wanted him to be free from. He told me that he had believed her for a long time, and then he told me about the moment he stopped. He had found, in the course of separating and going through shared files, the business records for the consulting firm. He had found the original capital documentation. He had seen, in black and white, that $8,000 had come in as a family contribution. And he had found a note in Veronica's handwriting, in her personal planner, which she had left behind, that said, regarding that entry, seize money. Don't mention when planning anniversary dinner. She had known. She had always known where the money came from, and she had deliberately not told him. Because then he would have known his mother had given generously, and she needed him to see me as small. He cried on the phone, not politely. Ugly tears, the way men cry when they've held it too long. I let him. When he was quieter, I said, Michael, I need to say something and I need you to really hear it. Okay. What happened hurt me deeply. Not just the things you said that day, but the years before it, the way you let me be diminished without saying anything, the way you chose peace with her over honesty with me. I need you to understand that. I know, he said. And I need you to understand that what we had isn't automatically restored just because she's gone. I'm not angry, but I am different than I was. I'm not going to be the person who asks for nothing and accepts whatever is given. I can't be that person anymore. A pause. I know, he said again, quieter. But I love you, I said, and I am your mother, and if you want to do the work of rebuilding this, I am willing. He exhaled. Thank you, he said. Mom's thank you. I am 63 years old as I tell you this story. Michael and I have been rebuilding for about a year and a half. Slowly, carefully. The way you rebuild a wall that has been damaged brick by brick, with attention to what caused the damage in the first place so you don't repeat it. He came to visit last spring. He drove to me this time, all 4 hours of it without being asked. He sat in my living room and we talked for hours, real talk, the kind we hadn't had in years. He saw the watercolors I had hung on the wall. He met Diane. He called me Sunday evening on his way home and said, I had a really good time, Mom. It was not everything repaired, but it was real. I told him about the will, all of it. I thought he deserved to know, and I thought he deserved to understand why. He was quiet for a long time, and then he said, That's fair. I think that's fair. I nearly fell off my chair. I do want to ask, he said. Is there room for me to earn my way back in? Not to the money, I don't mean the money, I mean in your life. I thought about that for a long time. Yes, I said. There's always been room, you just have to choose to walk through it. He is choosing, imperfectly the way humans do, but choosing. I have not reopened the loan money. I don't intend to. He doesn't ask. I think we both understand that some things, once spent, are simply spent. What matters now is what we build from here. As for Veronica, I genuinely wish her well, not performatively. I think she was a woman who was afraid, beneath all that polish, and fear makes people cruel in ways they sometimes don't even recognize. That doesn't excuse what she did, but it explains it. And I am old enough to know that holding hatred in your body only poisons your own blood. I let it go, all of it. And I kept the life I built during those 18 months of silence and rebuilding. The book club, the watercolors, I've gotten surprisingly good, sold 2 small pieces at a local fair and nearly cried from the shock of it. The morning walks, the freelance work, the friendships I had been neglecting for years while I pointed all my love in one direction. I kept all of it. Because here is what I learned. The life you build for yourself is the one that stays. The love you pour into others can be refused, manipulated, taken for granted. But the life you build for yourself, the dignity you maintain, the standards you uphold, the self you choose to be, that belongs to you. It cannot be taken. It cannot be dismissed or reframed or slid across a table. It is yours. There is a woman reading this right now, or watching, or listening, who knows exactly what I'm talking about. She's a mother, or a grandmother, or simply a woman who has given and found herself one day standing in a kitchen holding a stack of plates, hearing herself described as exhausting by someone she loves. I want to talk to her for a moment. First, your love is not the problem. Don't let anyone convince you that loving too much is a character flaw. The capacity to love fiercely and give generously is one of the most valuable things a human being can possess. The problem is never the love. The problem is when we give it in ways that teach people they don't have to show up for us in return. Second, you are allowed to stop. Stopping is not abandonment. Stopping does not make you a bad mother or a cold person or someone who gave up. Stopping, stepping back, going quiet, taking your energy and your presence and your heart and redirecting them toward your own life is sometimes the most loving thing you can do, because it forces honesty. It removes the comfort of a one-sided arrangement. It says, I will not participate in my own diminishment asterisk. And that sentence, once said, changes things. Third, you deserve a life. Not a life in waiting, not a life organized around being available, not a life that only exists in the margins of other people's schedules. A full, actual, textured, interesting life with things in it that have nothing to do with being someone's mother or someone's wife or someone's anything. Go take the class. Join the club. Take the trip. Make the friends. Hang the watercolors on the wall. You are not done. You are not a supporting character. You are the protagonist of this story, and it is not over. Fourth, and listen to me here, the children who are meant to find their way back will find their way back. Not all of them do. I know that. There are mothers reading this whose children have been so thoroughly shaped by someone else's influence that the distance may be permanent. That grief is real, and I will not minimize it. But some of them do come back. Not because you chased them, but because you stopped. Because you demonstrated, through your own actions, that you had a self-worth returning to. Michael came back because he saw me continuing without him. Not thriving to prove a point, genuinely, quietly, determinedly continuing. And something in that was more compelling than anything I could have said or done or given. That's the paradox. When you finally stop fighting for someone to see you, they start to see you. Last thing. Your worth is not determined by whether your children recognize it. It never was. It was there when you washed the cereal bowl before dawn. It was there when you drove 4 hours in October cold to sit in a bleacher and cheer. It was there every single time you chose that child over yourself, over and over, out of love. It was always there. The only question was whether you could see it yourself. I am 63 years old. I have a house that is mine. I have friends who choose me every week without obligation. I have watercolors on my wall that I made with my own hands. I have a son who is learning, slowly, what it means to be worthy of the mother he has. And I have myself, finally, completely, without apology. That is enough. It is more than enough. It is everything. My name is Carol Simmons. I was the mother who gave everything and was told it wasn't good enough. I stopped giving to people who couldn't receive it. And then, finally, beautifully, at 61 years old, I started giving to myself. It was the best thing I ever did.